The question of whether or not citizens should be able to own firearms has been discussed since the founding of our country. But to some, the questions should be pointed on a more ethical standpoint, such as, how do gun laws affect the rate of gun violence throughout the US? Why do people argue for or against guns in the first place? Does the gun debate involve other social issues such as racism and gender inequality? But maybe the most important question to ask is, what is the real cause of gun violence and who are the people committing it? But to answer these questions, we must look at the history of gun control in the United States as a whole. It all started in 1791 with the ratification of the Second Amendment. But since then, there has only been 7 acts that put tighter restrictions on guns. Of these include the restriction to sell guns to any convicted felons, drug users, or the mentally ill. These laws also include the ban of mail-order guns as well as armor-piercing ammunition. These laws overall made it more difficult for the average citizen to get a gun. With instant background checks and high taxes, many people would be eligible to get one. In 1994, President Clinton passed the assault weapon ban, which made certain semi-automatic rifles illegal. The guns that fell in the category of assault weapons was largely debated, and the law expired in 2004. More recently, Obama has tried to have sweeping gun control reforms that include universal background checks, the reinstatement and strengthening of the assault weapon ban, and limiting ammunition magazines to only a 10-round capacity.
Meanwhile, in Washington today, the Supreme Court took up a landmark case, a case that could decide for the first time ever whether the Second Amendment guarantees Americans the right to own a gun.
The Second Amendment says plainly the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but that comes at the end of a much longer sentence giving states the right to keep a well-regulated militia.
Since its conception, the Second Amendment, guaranteeing the right to bear arms, has been one of the most controversial clauses in history. Gun supporters have invoked it to make the case for owning firearms, while others have cited it to encourage more stringent anti-gun laws. Regardless, gun ownership in the United States remains strong compared to the rest of the world, and the debate over gun rights protection versus gun control has grown more diverse than ever before.
As long as people are fearful that their government may take away their guns, they're going to keep buying them as long as they can.
The NRA is able to prevent publicly supported gun control legislation from passing because their members are so deeply committed and passionate about the idea that if you pass any form of gun control legislation, it's going to eventually lead to the loss of all gun rights.
From my cold, dead hands.
The historical record provides compelling evidence that racism underlies gun control laws, and not in any subtle way. Throughout much of American history, gun control was openly stated as a method for keeping blacks and Hispanics in their place. As gun control advocates push for stricter gun laws and pro-gun groups continue to push back, there's one important aspect of the debate conservatives tend to fear discussing: race. Contrary to conservative views, race does factor into determining how the United States should consider moving forward in addressing gun violence and gun control. In the US, gun laws are as polarizing an issue between liberals and conservatives as any other. According to a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center in 2012, when asked whether or not stricter gun laws would reduce mass shootings, only 29% of Republicans said it would, while 79% of Democrats think it would. 32% of Republicans said stricter gun laws would reduce accidental gun deaths, but that number jumps to 74% among Democrats. With that in mind, and understanding that the Republican Party is heavily white and that the Democratic Party is far more racially diverse, it's not hard to see how race and politics intersect at the center of the gun debate. A 2005 Gallup poll found that 1 in 3 white Americans owned a gun in this country, whereas only 1 in 6 people of color did. Virtually the same results were found in a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center, which said 31% of white Americans were gun owners, while only 15% of black Americans and 11% of Latino Americans owned a gun. Overall, of those Americans who own guns, 82% of them are white.
Historically and today, women are much more in favor of gun control than men are, and I mean it's a gender gap that just does not exist on the vast majority of other public policies. Depending on the question, the gap could be anywhere from 10 to 15 percentage points, where women are more in favor of restricting firearms access than men are. And women traditionally have been very important in pushing for gun control laws, sometimes under the banner of moms organizing in that way. The National Rifle Association and other gun rights groups are concerned, and I think rightly, about declining rates of gun ownership and are looking for new markets, and women would be an obvious market. Most, as Phil mentioned, most gun owners traditionally are men. Women potentially represent an untapped market. And so you're starting to see, I shouldn't say starting, you're seeing a continuation of a campaign on the part of the National Rifle Association and other gun rights groups to associate firearms with empowered womanhood, with feminism, with female independence and autonomy. And I think that's a message that has not gained a huge amount of traction traditionally, but I think there's some evidence that it is beginning to.
After figuring out all the facts behind the gun control debate, it is hard to find a stance that could benefit everyone. But personally, while mass shooting and accidental misfires cause inexplicable tragedy, many times such events are isolated and infrequent, making intense legislative efforts to curtail the presence of guns disproportionate and reactionary as opposed to pragmatic. Instead, legislators should pursue enhanced background check practices that examine a citizen profile in an efficient manner that is not weighted down by cumbersome bureaucracy. Will the questions behind the gun control debate be answered anytime soon? No. But that does not stop millions of pro and anti-gun advocates from preaching their beliefs and eventually establishing a community with safe gun control.